Have you ever wondered what would happen if the world judged you not for what you carried in your hands, but for the color of your skin? Imagine stepping onto a plane, ticket in hand, status unquestionable, yet treated as though you didn't belong. What choice would you make? Stay silent and swallow the humiliation, or stand tall and risk everything to expose the truth? This is the story of Malik Anderson, a black CEO who made a radical choice. He pretended to be a difficult passenger, not out of arrogance, but to hold up a mirror to an airline's culture of quiet prejudice. What followed shocked an entire industry, an entire crew suspended before the eyes of stunned passengers, a boardroom war that threatened to tear a company apart, and a reckoning that forced the world to ask, what does dignity cost, and who gets to decide who deserves it? If you were in his place, what would you have done? Would you have kept your head down or fought back in a way that no one could ignore? Stay with us as we unfold this extraordinary story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The glass walls of JFK Airport shimmered under the afternoon sun, casting long beams of light across the bustling terminal. People hurried past, some pulling sleek roller bags, others clinging to passports and coffee cups, their faces set in the familiar rush of travel. At the first-class check-in desk, a tall black man in a simple navy blazer stood quietly in line. His name was Malik Anderson. He looked like any other business traveler, calm, composed, maybe even a little tired. Yet there was something in the way he carried himself, a stillness that hinted at something deeper. When it was finally his turn, Malik stepped forward and placed his passport and electronic boarding pass on the counter. The young woman behind the desk, Rachel Turner, barely glanced at him before frowning. "Sir, this is first-class check-in," she said. Her voice clipped. "Yes," Malik replied evenly. "That's the ticket I purchased." Rachel hesitated, her eyes narrowing as if she didn't quite believe him. She picked up the passport, flipped through it slowly, then tapped on her keyboard with deliberate slowness. A white man behind Malik coughed impatiently, shifting his weight. Rachel immediately looked up at him with an apologetic smile. "I'll be with you in just a moment," she said warmly to the man, before turning back to Malik with a cool expression. "I just need to verify a few things," she muttered. Malik stood silently, his hands resting on the counter, inside. His heart gave a slow, steady thump. He had expected this. In fact, he had counted on it. Because today, Malik wasn't traveling as himself. Not really. He was here to play a role, to pretend. For years, he had heard whispers, complaints, and lawsuits against airlines, stories of how passengers of color, particularly black travelers, were treated as if they didn't belong in premium cabins. He had heard the pain in their voices. He had lived some of it himself, and yet no investigation ever seemed to capture the truth. Reports were buried, lawsuits dragged on, excuses piled up. So Malik had decided to test it himself, to walk straight into the lion's den and see what happened when the gatekeepers thought he was just another difficult passenger. He let Rachel's silence stretch. She tapped the keyboard again, sighed dramatically, then asked, "Do you have proof of purchase? Maybe a receipt?" Malik lifted his eyes to hers, calm but steady. "The boarding pass in your hand is proof." Rachel's lips tightened. She clicked again, then finally printed his luggage tags with exaggerated care. She slapped them onto his suitcase, then pointed toward the side scale. "Put it there. I need to weigh it again," she ordered. The man behind Malik shifted, exasperated. Rachel looked past Malik once more, her face softening toward the white traveler. "Thank you for your patience, sir. I'll have you done in no time," she told him sweetly. Malik rolled his suitcase onto the scale. The numbers flashed green well within the limit, but Rachel pursed her lips anyway. "It's close," she said, her tone sharp. "Next time, consider traveling lighter." Malik gave a small nod. Inside, he felt the old sting of humiliation. He remembered being a boy, standing beside his father at an airport in Atlanta, when security had pulled them out of line for random checks. His father's jaw had tightened, but he had said nothing. Malik had asked later. Why us, his father, had sighed, because some people look at us and only see trouble. "Son, that's why you have to walk taller, work harder, always." Now, decades later, Malik still carried that lesson, but today was different. Today, he wasn't just a passenger. He was the CEO of Anderson Global Systems, the company whose software managed airport data for over 40 airlines worldwide, including this one. And though no one here knew it yet, every keystroke Rachel tapped on her computer was routed through Malik's own servers. He watched Rachel hand him his documents at last, her smile thin, perfunctory. "Enjoy your flight," she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. Malik collected his things and stepped aside. As he walked away, he heard the man behind him receive his boarding pass within seconds, greeted with an easy laugh from Rachel. For a moment, Malik paused by the terminal window, watching planes taxi along the runway. He closed his eyes, inhaled, and let the anger settle into something sharper, calmer. This was only the first test. There would be more, and he would endure every slight, every dismissive glance, because every detail mattered. Every word spoken today would become evidence. In his pocket, a small recording device was already running, its light blinking steadily. Malik touched it lightly, a quiet reminder to himself. This wasn't just about him. This was about proving what so many had said for years, that dignity and respect should never depend on the color of your skin or the assumptions of a stranger. And, before this day was done, the entire world would see what happened when those assumptions collided with the truth. Malik straightened his shoulders, picked up his carry-on, and walked toward security. His role as the difficult passenger had just begun. The line at security curled around chrome posts and velvet ropes, the kind of endless coil that tested even the most patient traveler. Malik Anderson stood quietly, his hands tucked into his pockets, his eyes moving from one uniformed officer to the next. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had spent decades in airports. Yet beneath that calm exterior, his mind was turning. The officer at the scanner waved him forward. Malik placed his bag on the belt and stepped through the detector. It buzzed. The officer's expression shifted instantly. "Step back, sir," he ordered, arms out. Malik complied. He was used to the ritual wand sweep. Pockets checked again, shoes tapped twice on the floor. The machine had probably picked up his watch, though he had cleared it countless times before. Still, the officer looked him over as if Malik were a problem waiting to happen. "You've been selected for additional screening," the officer announced flatly. Malik glanced at the people behind him. A white couple holding hands breezed through the detector without pause, their laughter ringing in his ears. The officer did not even look at them. Malik felt the weight of the moment settle against his chest. He raised his arms again as instructed, the wand brushing over his shoulders, his legs, his ankles, Each beep brought a sharper edge to the officer's tone. "Empty your pockets completely." "They are empty." Malik replied calmly. "Do it again." Malik slid his hands into his trousers, pulling them out slowly. Palms up. Nothing. The officer scowled as if disappointed. "You can go," he said finally, waving Malik off with a dismissive flick. As Malik collected his bag, he caught his reflection in the glass wall of the security station. His posture was as straight as ever, but behind his eyes he saw the memory of another time. He was 12, standing in line with his father, Charles Anderson, at Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. They were on their way to visit Malik's grandmother. A guard had stopped them, pulled them aside, searched their belongings in full view of the crowd. Malik had watched the other children his age walk by with their families, laughing, while his father stood rigid and silent, his dignity stripped in front of strangers. "Why us?" Dad Malik had asked afterward, voice trembling with confusion. His father's eyes had softened, though pain flickered in their depths. "Because sometimes, son, the world sees the color of your skin before it sees the content of your character. That's why we walk with our heads high. That's why we endure." Now, decades later, Malik heard his father's words echoing through the years. He had endured. He had risen beyond what many thought possible. He had built Anderson Global Systems from a two-man startup into a corporation valued in the billions. The silent backbone behind the security, scheduling, and data systems of major airlines. He could have chosen to live in comfort, traveling only on private jets, avoiding moments like this forever. But Malik believed in seeing the world as it truly was, not from behind tinted windows and champagne flutes. And today, he had come to see it with clear eyes. The voice of his conscience pressed against him. "You could reveal who you are right now. End this charade." But another voice, quieter, firmer, rose to meet it. "Not yet. Not until the truth is undeniable. Not until every word is recorded, every action exposed." Malik adjusted the strap of his carry-on and moved toward the terminal. The crowd surged around him, the smell of fried food and coffee mixing with the metallic tang of recycled air. Announcements blared overhead, boarding calls, delays, reminders about unattended luggage. It was the usual chaos of travel, yet Malik felt as if he were walking through a silent test. Each moment designed to measure not just his patience but his resolve. At the VIP lounge entrance, he presented his pass. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup, frowned as she scanned it. "Are you sure this is the right lounge?" she asked. "Yes," Malik said, his voice calm but steady. Her eyes darted to his clothes, then back to the screen. "This is for first-class passengers only." "I am a first-class passenger," Malik repeated. The woman sighed, clicking her mouse, as if reluctantly confirming what should have been obvious. "Fine. You may enter," she said at last, handing back his pass without a smile. Inside. The lounge glowed with soft lighting and polished wood accents. Leather chairs stretched in neat rows, filled with travelers sipping cocktails and working on laptops. Malik chose a quiet corner, placing his bag by his side. He watched as servers drifted between tables, refilling drinks with cheerful chatter. When one finally reached him, he asked politely for a glass of sparkling water with lemon. The server nodded, then walked away. Malik waited. 10 minutes passed. No water came. Across the lounge, he saw a man in a gray suit receive a cocktail within 2 minutes of asking. Malik inhaled slowly, His patience was a mask he wore well, but even masks grew heavy. Then a voice startled him. "Sir, would you like some water?" He looked up to see a young attendant, no more than 22, holding a tray. His name tag read Jason Cole. Jason's smile was genuine, not forced. He set down the glass gently, adding a slice of lemon without being asked. "Thank you," Malik said, surprised by the kindness. Jason nodded. "Of course, if you need anything else, just let me know." Malik studied him for a moment. The boy's uniform was crisp, but his shoes scuffed, suggesting long hours. Yet his eyes carried no judgment, no suspicion, just simple decency. Malik felt a flicker of something rare hope. As Jason walked away, Malik leaned back in his chair. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe. The sting of humiliation at security still lingered, but Jason's small act of humanity reminded him why this test mattered. It wasn't about punishing people like Rachel or the officer at security. It was about proving that a culture could change, that individuals like Jason could become the new face of an industry long marred by prejudice. He closed his eyes, resting his head against the leather. The hum of the lounge surrounded him, voices rising and falling like waves. Yet beneath it all, Malik felt the pulse of something stronger: conviction. This journey wasn't about comfort. It wasn't even about him. It was about holding up a mirror to an entire system and forcing it to see what it tried so hard to ignore. The day was only beginning, and already the cracks were showing. Malik knew the hours ahead would demand more of his composure, more of his restraint. But he was ready, because when the curtain finally lifted, when the role of difficult passenger ended, the truth would speak louder than any excuse, and everyone would be watching. The boarding area for Flight 742 buzzed with tension and fatigue. Families huddled over carry-ons. Business travelers tapped at phones with one hand and balanced coffee cups in the other. The loudspeaker announced, "First class and Group 1 passengers may now board." A line formed instantly, sharp and eager. Malik Anderson walked toward the gate with his boarding pass in hand. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind, not because he feared confrontation, but because he knew how easily perception could turn against him. Today, he wasn't the billionaire CEO who advised heads of state on airport infrastructure. Today, he was simply a black man in a blazer, about to be judged for stepping into a space many thought he didn't belong. At the desk stood Brian Miller, the gate supervisor. His hair was perfectly parted, his tie drawn too tight. He was the kind of man who prided himself on knowing who fit and who didn't. Malik placed his pass down calmly. Brian barely looked at him before saying, "Just a moment, sir. We need to verify your seat assignment." Malik glanced at the sign above the counter. First class boarding now. To his right, 2 white men in tailored suits approached, boarding passes in hand. Brian greeted them with a smile. "Gentlemen, welcome aboard. Please proceed." He scanned their tickets without hesitation. Malik stood waiting. His pass was still in Brian's hand, untouched. The seconds stretched. He could feel eyes behind him, passengers shifting impatiently. He heard the faint mutter, "What's the holdup?" Brian cleared his throat. "Sir, we sometimes get errors in the system. I need to double-check that you belong in this cabin." Malik's voice remained steady. "The ticket in your hand confirms my cabin." Brian gave him a thin smile. "Please step aside so we don't delay the line." There it was, the quiet dismissal, the subtle humiliation wrapped in professionalism. Malik's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He stepped aside, watching as more passengers filed past, their tickets scanned without question. Rachel Turner, the same check-in agent from earlier, appeared at the desk to whisper something into Brian's ear. They both looked at Malik, then away. He caught the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the silent judgment written in the lines of their mouths. Brian finally waved him back. "All right, you're clear. Just be aware, Mr. Anderson, we take note of passengers who cause difficulties at the gate." Malik took his pass and walked down the jet bridge without another word. But inside, a storm brewed. As the carpeted tunnel narrowed, he remembered his mother, Elaine Anderson, who used to tell him, "They will test you, Malik, every step, and you must decide, will you carry their weight or make them carry yours?" He breathed deeply. Today, he would make them carry it, whether they knew it yet or not. On board, the cabin smelled of leather and champagne. Polished wood trim gleamed under soft golden lights. Passengers settled into wide seats that reclined into beds, attendants rushing to hang coats and offered drinks. Malik stepped into the aisle and instantly felt the eyes. A woman in pearls looked him up and down, lips pressed thin. A man in a navy suit leaned closer to his companion, whispering, as if Malik's presence itself was an inconvenience. At his seat, 2A, Malik placed his carry-on overhead and sat down. The lead attendant approached Linda Hayes, her uniform flawless, her smile rehearsed. "Sir, may I see your ticket again?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with suspicion. Malik handed it over. She glanced at it quickly, then back at him. "We just want to be sure everyone is seated correctly." "I am," Malik replied evenly. Linda nodded curtly, but her eyes lingered, as if searching for something wrong. She returned the ticket with a clipped, "Thank you." Moments later, Malik pressed the call button. Linda appeared, irritation barely hidden. "Yes, could I see the menu, please?" She retrieved it reluctantly, placing it on his tray table with a snap. Malik studied it slowly, then looked up. "I'd like to request the grilled salmon for dinner." Linda pursed her lips. "Those are limited. We usually reserve them for our premium loyalty guests." Malik raised an eyebrow. "My ticket says first class. That should include all options." Her smile tightened. "I'll see what I can do." She turned on her heel before he could respond. Across the aisle, another passenger chuckled quietly. Malik caught the whisper. Some people always want more than their share. The words stung. But Malik sat still, folding his hands. He had chosen this role deliberately. He had decided to become the very thing they expected a demanding passenger, unyielding, insistent so their treatment could reveal itself in the light. 15 minutes later, Linda returned with a glass of water, no lemon, no ice. She placed it down with a sharp clink. "We'll let you know about the salmon," she said, her tone dismissive. Malik met her eyes. "Thank you." The restraint cost him more than he cared to admit. Inside, he wanted to confront her, to tell her that her every word, every gesture was being captured, recorded, and would not be forgotten. But timing mattered. Evidence mattered, and patience was his sharpest weapon. As he sipped the lukewarm water, Malik thought of Jason Cole, the young attendant from the lounge. Jason had been the rare reminder that decency still existed in unexpected places. Malik wondered if Jason had boarded this flight, or if their brief encounter was the only kindness he'd see today. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a smooth evening flight ahead. Malik leaned back, closing his eyes. Around him, the murmurs of luxury filled the air. Orders for champagne, laughter over business deals, the rustle of newspapers, but beneath it all, Malik heard something else, the steady beat of his own resolve. This was more than a flight. This was a mirror, and by the time the wheels touched down in London, the reflection it showed would change lives. The aircraft taxied slowly away from the gate, its engines humming low, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft golden glow. Malik Anderson sat in seat 2A, back straight, eyes half closed as if resting. In truth, his senses were alive, cataloging every detail the way Linda Hayes avoided eye contact when she passed his row, the way her voice grew warmer when speaking to other passengers, the casual glances from those around him who seemed to wonder why a black man occupied a space they assumed wasn't his. Dinner service began. Trays of champagne and canapes drifted down the aisle. Malik pressed the call button again. Linda appeared, her smile thin, professional, but her tone heavy with impatience. "Yes. Sir, I'd like to confirm my dinner choice," Malik said. "The grilled salmon, if available." Linda's brows lifted, the faintest flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "As I mentioned earlier, we reserve certain entrees for our highest-tier loyalty guests. I can offer you the chicken pasta." Malik held her gaze. The menu lists both options without restriction. Her lips pressed into a tight line. "I'll see what I can do," she repeated, then moved briskly away. Minutes later, Malik watched as the passenger in 2C, a white man with silver hair and a heavy gold watch, was served the salmon, complete with lemon garnish and a glass of Chardonnay. Linda leaned close to him, her voice almost tender as she asked if he'd like more wine. When she finally returned to Malik, she placed a tray with the pasta in front of him without a word. The plate clattered slightly against the table, the sauce already beginning to congeal. Malik looked at it, then back up at Linda. For a moment, silence stretched between them. He could have confronted her then. He could have revealed himself, shown her who he truly was, ended this charade in an instant. But he didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "Thank you." Her expression betrayed surprise, almost disappointment, as though she had expected resistance. She gave a curt nod and walked away. Malik picked up his fork, twirling the pasta slowly. The flavor was bland, the texture heavy, but he ate anyway, because this wasn't about food. This was about evidence. Each slight, each denial, each moment of disrespect added weight to the truth he intended to unveil. Across the aisle, the silver-haired passenger chuckled at something his companion said. Malik heard the words carried just enough to reach him. "First class isn't what it used to be. They'll let anyone in these days." The remark slid into the air like a knife. Malik's chest tightened, but he kept his face impassive. He had heard worse in boardrooms, in investor meetings, in whispered conversations that fell silent the moment he entered. But here, in this narrow metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground, the prejudice felt sharper, more intimate. He set down his fork. His mind drifted again to his father, Charles Anderson, whose quiet dignity had been both shield and burden. He thought of Elaine, his mother, who had carried her own battles with grace, but whose eyes sometimes welled with unspoken sorrow when Malik came home with stories of being different. Was he carrying their voices with him now, or was he trying to silence them? The thought unsettled him. He shifted in his seat, glancing at the window where the dark sky stretched endless, dotted with distant stars. Linda returned later with dessert. To the passenger in 2C, she offered chocolate mousse with a flourish. To Malik, she placed a plain fruit plate. No explanation, no apology. Malik's jaw clenched. His voice nearly rose, but he caught it, holding the anger inside. He reminded himself patience, evidence, timing. The man in 2C laughed again, leaning back in his seat, comfortable, at ease. Malik felt the opposite. Every second pressed against him, asking why he endured this quietly, why he didn't use his power to end it now. The answer came in the form of Jason Cole. Halfway through the flight, Jason appeared, balancing a tray. His expression carried no trace of Linda's coldness. "Mr. Anderson," Jason said softly. "I noticed earlier you requested the salmon. We had one left over, and I saved it for you." He placed the plate gently in front of Malik, along with a fresh glass of sparkling water with lemon. Malik blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you, Jason," he said, his voice sincere. Jason nodded, his smile small but genuine. "You deserve it as much as anyone else here." Those words struck deeper than Jason knew. Malik studied the young man, noticing the slight weariness in his posture, the way his hands bore calluses despite the polished uniform. Here was a worker at the bottom rung, yet he carried more humanity than those wielding authority around him. Malik ate the salmon slowly, savoring not just the food but the principle behind it. This was what decency looked like. Not grand gestures, not empty apologies, just fairness, respect, dignity. When Jason moved away, Malik leaned back and closed his eyes. But his mind did not rest. Instead, it wandered into darker corridors of thought. He asked himself, was this plan, this masquerade, truly the right path by enduring these slights? Was he proving the system's corruption, or was he allowing himself to be wounded again, reopening scars he had carried for decades? The doubts pressed harder than the prejudice. He was Malik Anderson, a man who had shaped systems, advised governments, directed billions in contracts, and yet here he was, pretending to be powerless, tasting humiliation spoon by spoon, for the sake of a truth he already knew. What if it broke him instead of them? His breath caught for a moment. He rubbed his temple, forcing himself back into control. The doubts were real, but so was his purpose, and his purpose stretched far beyond his own pride, because if he exposed what happened here, not as a story from a faceless passenger, but as the lived experience of the man who owned the very systems they depended on, then there would be no denying it, no silencing, no burying the evidence in legal jargon. The engines droned steadily, the hours stretching across the ocean. Malik drifted in and out of shallow sleep, his dreams filled with echoes of his parents' voices, with memories of crowded airports, with the faces of travelers who had been told again and again that they did not belong. When the lights brightened for breakfast service, Malik awoke with a start. Linda moved down the aisle once more, her voice clipped, her smile reserved only for certain passengers. Malik asked for black coffee. She brought it lukewarm. He thanked her anyway, though his eyes no longer hid the steel behind them. The flight attendant turned away, unbothered. But Jason, passing quietly, caught Malik's expression and gave a small nod, as if to say, "I see you. I know." It was enough. Malik straightened, adjusting his blazer, his mind sharpening like glass. Soon, very soon, this charade would end, and when it did, the world would no longer see just a difficult passenger. They would see the truth standing before them, undeniable and unshakable. The aircraft began its descent into London. Malik gazed out at the horizon, the first rays of dawn spilling over the clouds. The day of reckoning was about to begin. The landing gear thumped beneath the cabin as Flight 742 descended through layers of gray English clouds. Passengers stirred awake, stretching, fastening seat belts. The scent of reheated breakfast trays lingered in the air, mingling with the dry chill that always came when the cabin pressure shifted. Malik Anderson sat upright, his eyes on the window, the pale light of morning brushing across his face. His hands were folded neatly in his lap, but his thoughts were anything but still. Every moment of the past 10 hours was etched in his mind: the gate delays, the condescension, the pasta placed in front of him as if to say he deserved nothing better. He had absorbed it all like a sponge, every detail now stored in both his memory and the discreet device he carried in his jacket pocket. The evidence was clear. What remained was the reckoning. Linda Hayes passed through the aisle with her usual efficiency, collecting stray cups, directing passengers with clipped instructions. She barely looked at Malik as she leaned over him to check the overhead bin. When she did, her expression was one of polite dismissal, as though she had already decided who he was and what he was worth. "Sir, please fasten your seatbelt. We're landing shortly," she said, her voice low but firm. Malik clicked the belt into place with deliberate calm. Of course, the plane jolted as the wheels kissed the wet runway. A collective exhale spread through the cabin, the relief of arrival. Malik sat motionless, waiting, listening as passengers gathered their belongings. His chest rose and fell with slow breaths. He had been patient. He had endured. Now came the moment he had promised himself. As the seatbelt sign dimmed, passengers stood, reaching for bags. Malik remained seated, watching the orderly chaos unfold. Jason Cole moved down the aisle, helping an elderly woman retrieve her suitcase. His kindness was quiet, unforced. Malik noted it once more, storing it alongside the darker moments. When it was finally time to disembark, Malik stepped into the jet bridge with the others. The air smelled of metal and damp concrete. Heathrow's massive terminal unfolded ahead, bright and bustling with morning travelers. He walked steadily, his mind rehearsing what he would say. The truth had to be delivered with precision, not anger. At the arrival gate, a team of uniformed staff waited more than usual. Among them stood Eleanor Brooks, the senior airport manager. Her sharp gray suit and measured stance signaled authority. She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on Malik with a flicker of recognition. He saw her stiffen, though she masked it quickly. "Mr. Anderson," she greeted, her voice formal. "We need a word." Passengers glanced curiously, whispering. Some slowed, sensing tension. Malik followed Eleanor to a private conference room just off the concourse. Inside, Rachel Turner and Brian Miller were already seated, their faces tense. Linda Hayes entered moments later, her posture defensive, arms crossed. Jason Cole lingered awkwardly near the door, summoned without explanation. Eleanor gestured for Malik to sit. He remained standing. His presence filled the room, not by volume, but by the quiet gravity of a man who no longer intended to play along. "For the record," Eleanor began, "we've had reports of irregularities during your journey, complaints from crew, concerns about your behavior." Malik raised a hand, silencing her. His voice was low, steady, No, this will not begin with your version. This will begin with mine. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a small device. With a press of his thumb, the screen lit up, the room filled with sound. Rachel questioning his first-class ticket, Brian telling him to step aside, Linda's dismissive tone as she withheld service, the sneer of a passenger muttering that anyone could get into first class these days. Every word echoed back at them, undeniable. The color drained from Rachel's face. Brian shifted in his chair, tugging at his tie. Linda's lips parted, then closed again. Jason looked down, uncomfortable, though his conscience was clear. Eleanor's jaw tightened as she absorbed the truth. Malik let the silence hang, the weight of their actions pressing in. Then he spoke. My name is Malik Anderson. I'm not simply a passenger. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Anderson Global Systems, the company whose software your airline depends on for scheduling, baggage tracking, and security verification. In other words, every system you touched last night ran through the very infrastructure I built. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Eleanor's composure faltered. I boarded that plane as myself. Malik continued. But I allowed you to treat me as you saw me, not as my resume, not as my title, but as your assumptions dictated. And you revealed exactly what so many have claimed for years. He tapped the device again, replaying Linda's clipped refusal, Rachel's suspicion, Brian's order to step aside. The evidence was damning. Eleanor cleared her throat. Mr. Anderson, surely we can— No, Malik interrupted, his voice sharper now. This is not a matter for quiet apologies. This is a matter for accountability. He turned his gaze on Rachel first. You doubted the validity of my ticket because of who was holding it. You embarrassed me publicly, then smiled warmly at the man behind me. That is bias, pure and simple. Rachel's lips trembled. She looked down at her hands, unable to answer. Malik shifted to Brian. You withheld my boarding pass, delayed me deliberately, and implied I might be a disruptive passenger. That was humiliation disguised as protocol. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. His face flushed red. Finally, Malik looked at Linda. You decided I was less deserving. You denied my requests, served others better, and made sure I knew it. That is not service. That is prejudice. Linda's chin lifted slightly, as if clinging to pride, but her silence condemned her more than words could. Malik let the moment stretch. Then he turned to Jason. His voice softened. And you showed me kindness when no one else did. You treated me not as a burden, but as a guest. Remember that it is the only reason I still believe this culture can be changed. Jason swallowed hard, his eyes shining with something close to relief. Malik turned back to Eleanor. This is not the first time, and unless change is forced, it will not be the last. That is why, effective immediately, I'm suspending the entire crew of Flight 742 from duty pending a full investigation. The words hit the room like thunder. Rachel gasped. Brian leaned forward, protest in his eyes. Linda's jaw dropped, fury and fear battling across her face. Jason looked stunned, unsure if he had just lost his job or been vindicated. Eleanor stammered, Mr. Anderson, with respect, this is not negotiable, Malik said. His voice carried the weight of finality. I will not allow these actions to be swept aside with apologies and retraining sessions. This is systemic, and it will be addressed systemically. Beginning now. The room fell into silence again, the reality sinking in. Malik stood tall, his presence unshaken. He had chosen patience. He had chosen endurance. But now he chose justice. When he left the room, reporters were already gathering outside, drawn by whispers of what had unfolded. Passengers from the flight pointed, murmuring, recognizing him now as someone far more than a difficult passenger. Malik paused for a moment, the flash of cameras lighting the hallway. He looked back once at the closed door, knowing that the lives inside it had just changed forever. Then he faced forward, ready for the storm to come. The conference room emptied slowly after Malik's declaration, but the air remained thick with shock. Outside, the murmur of voices grew louder as passengers and staff whispered about what had just happened. News traveled fast in airports, faster than the rolling suitcases and the flashing screens announcing departures. Within minutes, Malik Anderson's name was already circulating through the terminal like a current. Eleanor Brooks lingered, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp as she studied him. "Mr. Anderson," she began, her tone strained. "You must understand that suspending an entire crew in front of passengers, this will cause chaos. The press will. The press will see what they need to see." Malik interrupted, his voice calm but immovable. "I have no interest in protecting reputations built on silence." Eleanor drew in a long breath. She had worked in aviation for decades, weathered scandals and strikes. But she had never been cornered like this. Malik could see her wrestling with the instinct to contain the damage, to smooth the rough edges with words. But she was wise enough to know that this time, words would not be enough. "Then at least allow us to issue a joint statement," she offered. Malik shook his head. "There will be a statement, but it will come from me, and it will not be softened." Jason Cole shifted near the doorway, uncertain whether he was still needed. Malik looked at him, his expression gentling. "Stay, Jason." The young man froze, then nodded quickly. His presence was a reminder that decency could be found even in a poisoned culture. Malik wanted him to witness what came next. Rachel Turner's eyes brimmed with tears. She had shrunk into her chair, her earlier sharpness gone, replaced by the realization that her casual biases had been laid bare. Brian Miller leaned back stiffly, his jaw clenched, while Linda Hayes looked ready to lash out, her pride bruised more than her conscience. Malik scanned their faces, feeling the weight of what justice meant. He had suspended them, yes, but what was suspension without reflection? What was punishment without the possibility of change? "Do you know why I played this role?" Malik asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. No one answered. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "I pretended to be difficult, not because I enjoy humiliation, but because I needed to see if what I've heard from countless others was true. And it was. Every hesitation, every dismissal, every denial you gave me proof that the system is not broken by accident. It is broken because people choose to look at someone like me and see trouble first." His words cut sharper than any raised voice could. Linda finally spoke, her tone defensive. "You were demanding. You asked for changes, for meals that weren't available." Malik turned to her, his eyes steady. "I asked for what the menu promised. I asked for what any other passenger would expect without question. That is not demanding. That is dignity." Linda faltered, her retort dying in her throat. Eleanor cleared her voice again. "Mr. Anderson, the airline will of course review all evidence," and Malik lifted the device in his hand. "There is no review necessary. The evidence speaks for itself. What matters now is how you respond, how you rebuild, and whether you choose to protect passengers or your pride. Jason looked from Malik to Eleanor, his young face conflicted. He had grown up in a world where authority always seemed untouchable, where people like him kept their heads down. To watch Malik speak so plainly, without fear, stirred something in him. Malik turned to Jason then, his tone softening again. "Tell me, Jason, why did you save that salmon for me?" Jason hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I saw how they treated you, and it wasn't fair. And I thought, if I didn't do something, then I was part of it too." A faint smile touched Malik's lips. "Remember that feeling. It will guide you when policies and protocols try to blind you." Jason nodded, swallowing hard. Malik straightened, shifting his attention back to the others. "This is not the end. This is the beginning. Every airline executive, every manager, every attendant will know what happened here. You may not like the shame, but shame is sometimes the only teacher that works." The room fell quiet again. Eleanor finally inclined her head. "Then I will cooperate," she said, the words heavy, reluctant. Malik studied her. For all her attempts at control, he sensed she understood the gravity of what had unfolded. He gave a small nod. The door opened suddenly, and a reporter's voice called out, "Mr. Anderson, is it true you suspended an entire crew mid-flight?" Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. The ripple had become a wave. Malik stepped toward the door, Jason at his side. His voice carried over the noise, even steady. "Yes, it's true, because accountability is not optional, and because passengers deserve more than excuses." The questions flew at him like hail. Were you mistreated? Was this entrapment? What happens next? But Malik did not flinch. He knew this moment was no longer just his. It belonged to every traveler who had been doubted, dismissed, or diminished. That night, as he sat alone in a quiet hotel room overlooking the Thames, Malik replayed the day in his mind. He poured a glass of water, his reflection faint in the dark window. He thought of his father's words about walking taller. He thought of his mother's quiet endurance, and he thought of Jason's trembling honesty, the way decency had found him in the smallest gesture. He wondered if he had gone too far, if public suspension was the right step. But then he remembered the look in Rachel's eyes, the shift in Jason's shoulders, the murmur of passengers who had seen it all. Sometimes the only way to wake a system was with a shock. Malik set down the glass and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow the headlines would run. Tomorrow the airline's board would call, some furious, some fearful. Tomorrow he would have to decide what reforms to demand, what structures to dismantle, what new standards to write. But tonight he allowed himself a single breath of peace. He had carried the weight of silence long enough. Now the truth was out, and it had its own wings. The morning headlines were merciless. Black CEO suspends entire flight crew in dramatic airport confrontation. Anderson exposes airline bias. Passenger or power broker. The man who shook aviation overnight, across London and New York. Screens flickered with Malik Anderson's image calm, upright, a man refusing to be silenced. By noon, Malik was seated in a sleek glass-walled boardroom at Heathrow's corporate offices. Around the long table sat executives in pressed suits, their eyes a mixture of discomfort and calculation. At the head of the table was Gregory Milton, the airline's CEO, his silver hair combed back, his voice measured but taut. "Mr. Anderson," Milton began, "let me first extend an apology on behalf of the company. What you experienced, what you endured, is unacceptable. But suspending the crew publicly has complicated matters." Malik's gaze swept the room. What complicated matters was the crew's behavior, not my response. I did not create the humiliation, I revealed it. Several executives shifted in their seats. One cleared her throat, another scribbled notes to avoid his stare. Malik let the silence linger before he leaned forward. "You depend on my systems," he said softly, yet every word landed with weight. "Your flights do not leave a gate. Your bags do not move through a carousel. Your security checks do not clear without Anderson Global Systems. That dependency is not a weapon. It is a responsibility. And today, that responsibility requires accountability." Milton bristled, though he tried to hide it. "We are prepared to conduct an internal review." "No." Malik cut in. "An internal review is another way of burying the truth under paperwork. This will be independent, transparent, and public. Anything less is dishonesty." Gasps flickered around the table. Executives glanced at each other nervously. Malik's tone did not rise, but the conviction behind it was unshakable. Eleanor Brooks sat farther down the table, her hands clasped tightly. She had been summoned to report on the confrontation. Now she spoke with measured care. "Mr. Anderson is right. If we appear to minimize this, the damage to our reputation will be irreparable. Public trust is fragile. We cannot afford to pretend." Milton shot her a glance, irritation flashing in his eyes, but he didn't contradict her. He knew the truth. The footage already spreading across social media was damning. Passengers had recorded parts of the gate confrontation, snippets of Malik's quiet refusal to be dismissed. And then the press conference outside the conference room, every word he spoke about accountability was already being replayed on cable news in an endless loop. Malik placed his device on the table. "You will hear the entire recording. And when you do, you will know this is not about one crew, one flight, or one airport. This is systemic, and I will not allow systemic abuse to be dressed up as individual mistakes." He pressed play. The room filled with voices, Rachel questioning his boarding pass, Brian instructing him to step aside, Linda's dismissive replies, the sneer of a passenger muttering about who belonged in first class. The executives shifted uncomfortably as the weight of the truth pressed into their ears. When it ended, silence fell again. Malik looked around the table, his eyes steady. "That is your culture speaking. That is the message you've been sending to people who don't fit the profile of privilege. And it stops now." Milton exhaled sharply. "What exactly are you demanding?" "Mr. Anderson." Malik leaned back, his voice even. "Not demands, conditions. If you wish to continue using my systems, you will agree to 3 immediate reforms. 1, a full cultural audit, independent of your board. 2, a transparent complaint process with protections against retaliation. 3, mandatory training designed not as a corporate checkbox, but as immersive accountability where every employee sees what passengers like me endure." The room buzzed with whispers. Milton's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to tear apart our operations." "No," Malik replied. "I'm asking you to rebuild them. There is a difference." His words hung in the air, undeniable. Jason Cole sat quietly at the end of the table, summoned unexpectedly as a witness. His uniform looked slightly rumpled under the weight of so much scrutiny, but his eyes remained fixed on Malik. For the first time, he felt he belonged in a room that usually held only power. Milton tried again. Mr. Anderson suspending the crew. They suspended themselves, Malik said, his voice carrying finality. Every action they took was their choice. My decision simply named it. And if your airline cannot hold people accountable for their choices, then your systems will no longer be powered by mine. The weight of that statement landed harder than any threat could. Everyone in the room knew what it meant. Without Anderson Global Systems, their entire operation would collapse within weeks. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor leaned forward. We should agree, not because we are forced, but because it is right. This is an opportunity to lead, not to hide. Her words shifted the energy in the room. Executives who had been silent began nodding faintly, some reluctantly, others with quiet relief. Milton looked at Malik, his pride clearly warring with pragmatism. Finally, he exhaled. Very well, we'll cooperate. The reforms will be enacted, but the publicity, Malik interrupted, is not your enemy. It is your chance at redemption. Use it. The meeting ended with signatures, agreements, reluctant nods. Malik stood, gathering his device, his presence towering even without raising his voice. He turned to Jason before leaving. Walk with me. They stepped out of the boardroom into the hallway, the buzz of the airport faint in the distance. Jason's voice trembled slightly. Mr. Anderson, do you think this will really change things? Malik looked at him, his expression softened by something like weary hope. Change is slow. It doesn't come from statements or headlines. It comes from people who decide, moment by moment, to do what you did to see what's wrong and refuse to be part of it. Jason swallowed, his eyes bright. I didn't want to stand by and watch. And that, Malik said gently, is the first step. Never underestimate it. They walked in silence for a few steps, the sound of rolling suitcases echoing through the corridor. Malik's thoughts churned, heavy but resolute. He knew the battle wasn't over. Headlines fade, promises dissolve. But culture was the slow beast, only moved by relentless pushing. He thought again of his father's words, walk taller, son, even when they try to cut you down to size. He thought of his mother's resilience, the way she carried her scars without letting them define her. And he thought of the countless passengers he had spoken to over the years, whose stories had been dismissed because they didn't have the leverage he carried. Tonight, he carried it for them. The cameras were waiting outside, flashing bright as Malik stepped into the terminal. Questions flew again, but he answered only one. What happens next, Mr. Anderson? He paused, his voice carrying across the sea of microphones. What happens next is justice not as revenge, but as repair. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong where they've earned the right to be. The crowd quieted, the words landing heavier than the noise, and with that, Malik walked on, Jason at his side, the weight of truth no longer a private burden but a public call. The boardroom confrontation had ended, but the ripples were only beginning to spread. By the next morning, Malik Anderson's face appeared on every major network, clips of his quiet, unwavering words. This is not about one crew. This is systemic, ran on repeat, dissected by commentators, praised by some, criticized by others. In New York, Commuters scrolled through headlines on their phones as trains rumbled underground. In Atlanta, a grandmother watching television shook her head, whispering. Finally, someone said it plain. In Chicago, a young law student posted Malik's speech online with the caption, "He's carrying what we've all felt." But Malik, seated alone at the small breakfast table in his London hotel suite, didn't care for the noise of media cycles. He stirred his coffee absently, the bitter steam curling upward, his mind elsewhere. The weight of the previous day pressed hard on him, not the decisions, but the emotions that came with them. He remembered the humiliation at the gate, the eyes on him in the cabin, the way Linda Hayes's tone had sliced quietly at his dignity. Even with all his power, he had still felt like the boy from South Carolina whose teachers doubted he could ever lead. That wound didn't disappear just because he had delivered justice. The knock on the door startled him. When he opened it, Jason Cole stood there, still in uniform, his face pale with nervousness. "Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry to bother you," Jason said quickly, "but they told me I should see you before the investigation moves forward. They said I might be called as a witness." Malik gestured for him to come in. "Sit down, Jason, and call me Malik." Jason perched on the edge of the chair, his hands twisting in his lap. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Linda already told some of the other attendants that I betrayed them. She said I made the crew look bad. I don't know if I'll even have a job after this." Malik studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward. "Do you believe you did the right thing?" Jason nodded, though his voice wavered. "Yes, I couldn't just stand by." "Then your job may change," Malik said gently. "But your integrity won't, and that's worth more than any uniform." Jason's shoulders slumped with both relief and fear. He had needed someone to tell him he wasn't alone. Malik felt a pang of recognition. He saw himself in the young man, the same fire that had once burned in him before years of scars had taught him patience. "Listen," Malik continued. "What you did matters. You're not just a witness, Jason. You're proof that culture can be different. And when people try to silence you, remember this silence is what got us here in the first place." Jason's eyes shone. "Thank you, Sir Malik. That means more than you know." They spoke for a while longer, about Jason's childhood, about his dream of one day becoming a teacher. Malik listened quietly, realizing that the young attendant's life might change entirely after this. And perhaps that was the point change began, with ordinary people forced to choose between comfort and courage. Later that afternoon, Malik walked into a press hall arranged by the airline's corporate office. The space was packed with cameras, reporters, and officials. Gregory Milton sat stiffly at the far end of the stage, flanked by Eleanor Brooks and a panel of senior leaders. Malik took his place at the podium, the hum of microphones amplifying every breath. He began simply. What happened on Flight 742 was not new. It was not unique. It was the echo of a problem that has lived in aviation, in business, in daily life for far too long. Flashes popped like lightning. The room hushed, every word hanging heavy. "I pretended to be a difficult passenger," Malik went on, his voice steady, "because I wanted to see if the stories I've heard from countless travelers were true. And they were. I was doubted, dismissed, denied not because of what I did, but because of who I am." Reporters scribbled furiously. Milton shifted uncomfortably, but Eleanor kept her eyes locked on Malik, knowing this moment would shape history. This airline has agreed to immediate reforms, Malik said. Independent audits, transparent complaints, cultural training that does more than tick a box. These are not negotiations, they are necessities, and I will personally oversee their progress. Hands shot up with questions, but Malik lifted his palm to quiet them. His next words came softer, but carried more power than any demand. This is not just about me. This is about every passenger who has been made to feel smaller than their ticket. Every worker who stayed silent because speaking up meant losing everything. I will not let silence win again. The hall erupted in applause, not from everyone, but from enough to make the sound echo through the walls. Malik stepped back, his chest rising and falling slowly. He had spoken not just as a CEO, but as a man carrying voices that had been muted too long. Afterward, Eleanor approached him quietly. "You realize," she said, "that what you've done will change not only this airline, but the entire industry. Other carriers will be forced to follow." "That's the idea," Malik replied, but in his heart, he knew the battle was far from won. That night, he walked alone by the Thames. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the cool air brushed against his face. His thoughts wandered to his parents again, to the boy he once was. He remembered his father's strong hand on his shoulder the day he graduated. The words he whispered, "Son, your voice will carry further than mine ever could. Use it well," he whispered back into the night. "I hope I'm using it well." "Dad," the river gave no answer, only the steady ripple of water against stone. But Malik felt a strange calm, as though the weight he had carried for so long was no longer his alone. The next morning, his phone buzzed with messages. Strangers from around the world sent words of gratitude. A woman wrote, "My son was removed from a flight last year for asking too many questions. Thank you for showing the world it wasn't just him." Another wrote, "You gave me hope to stand up in my workplace. I don't feel so small anymore." Malik read them slowly, one by one, feeling their voices stitch into his own. Change would not come overnight, but the echoes had begun, and he knew echoes, when loud enough, could become thunder. The applause from the press hall had barely faded before the backlash began. By evening, television panels were split down the middle. On one channel, Malik Anderson was hailed as a hero who had exposed long-buried prejudice. On another, he was painted as a manipulator, accused of staging the confrontation for power. Headlines competed for attention: champion of justice or corporate tyrant, Anderson's power play, did he go too far? Flight crew suspended, industry shaken. Malik sat in his hotel room, phone buzzing with nonstop alerts. He didn't need to open every message to know the tide was shifting. With every step toward truth, resistance always followed. The powerful rarely surrendered their comfort without a fight. A sharp knock at the door broke his thoughts. Eleanor Brooks entered without waiting for an invitation, her coat still damp from the London rain. She placed a stack of newspapers on the table. "You've rattled the hive," she said simply. Malik gave a small nod. "I expected nothing less. They're calling me every hour." Eleanor continued, "Executives, investors, regulators, some want reform. Others want your head. And the crew you suspended, they're threatening lawsuits. They're saying you entrapped them, provoked them." Malik's jaw tightened. "I didn't provoke anything they weren't already carrying inside. I gave them space to reveal it." Eleanor studied him. "You realize they'll twist it. They'll say you set them up. that you used your power unfairly." He met her eyes, unflinching. "I pretended to be powerless. That's what they can't forgive." Eleanor exhaled, a weary sound. "The board is meeting again tomorrow. They'll want concessions from you. I'll give them none." Malik replied. She almost smiled at his resolve, though the worry never left her face. "Then be ready. They'll come hard." After she left, Malik sat alone again, the city lights glowing outside the window. He felt the familiar tug of doubt creeping in the voice that whispered, "Was it too much? Did you push too far?" But then he remembered Jason Cole's trembling honesty, the emails flooding his inbox, the grandmother whispering thanks through her television. Doubt might visit, but purpose stayed. The next morning, the boardroom was colder than before. Gregory Milton's expression was hard, his patience thinner. Around the table, some executives looked exhausted, others angry. "We are under siege in the press." Milton snapped. "Our stock dipped 5% overnight. Investors are panicking, and our legal department is warning that suspending the entire crew without due process opens us to massive liability." Malik sat at the table's center, unshaken. "Liability comes from the harm you allowed, not the accountability I demanded." Brian Miller's lawyer was present this time, a thin man with sharp glasses. He leaned forward. "My client insists Mr. Anderson provoked him, that he deliberately delayed boarding, pressed demands to create conflict, and then weaponized his influence. This is entrapment." Malik's eyes met Brian's across the table. Brian's face was rigid, his pride wrapped around him like armor. "I did not entrap you," Malik said, voice low but cutting. "I stood in line with a valid ticket. You chose to treat me differently. You chose to doubt, to humiliate, to dismiss. That choice was yours. And now you want to call the truth a trap." The lawyer shifted, but Malik didn't give him space. "The only trap here is the one you built for yourself. A trap made of arrogance and bias." Linda Hayes's lawyer spoke next, her tone icy. "My client has served this airline for 20 years with distinction. She denies treating you unfairly. She says you were rude, demanding, disrespectful." Malik leaned back, his voice soft, steady. "Respect is not given to titles or uniforms. It is given to humanity, and she denied mine." Jason Cole, seated quietly at the end, finally spoke up. His voice shook at first but grew firmer. "I was there. I saw it. Mr. Anderson didn't provoke anyone. He asked for what the menu offered, what the ticket promised, and they treated him differently. I won't lie to protect anyone. Not now." The room turned toward him, some surprised at his courage. Malik gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Gregory Milton rubbed his temples. "This is spiraling out of control. We cannot afford a public war of words." "You don't have a choice," Malik said calmly. "The truth is already public. What you can choose is whether you fight it or fix it." The room fell silent again, tension thick in the air. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Mr. Anderson is right. Fighting this only deepens the damage. Reform is the only way forward." Milton's jaw worked as though he were chewing stones. "Reform comes at a cost." Malik leaned in. "So does silence. So does denial. And that cost is always higher." The meeting adjourned without resolution, but Malik knew the tide was turning. The airline could resist, could smear his name, but the truth was no longer contained. That evening, as Malik prepared to leave the building, Jason caught up with him in the corridor. "Why do you keep pushing?" Jason asked quietly. Most people would have walked away after making their point. But you keep going." Malik paused, looking at the young man. "Because I know what it feels like to sit where you sit to wonder if you'll be punished for telling the truth, to feel small in rooms built to make you small. And I also know what it feels like to have no one push back. I can't walk away from that. Jason, not anymore." Jason nodded slowly, the weight of the words sinking in. For the first time, he began to see that this wasn't just a scandal. It was a fight for something larger than flights and policies. Later, back in his hotel room, Malik stood by the window again, gazing at the city stretched out in lights. His phone buzzed with another headline, "Airline Board Divided as Anderson Refuses to Back Down." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the fatigue wash over him. He thought of his father's steady voice, his mother's quiet strength, the echoes of all those who had been silenced before. He whispered to himself, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about them." And with that, he knew the backlash would not break him. It would only prove why he had to keep going. The storm outside the airline's headquarters mirrored the tension inside. Rain lashed against tall glass windows as executives huddled in corners, whispering in low tones. The boardroom was once again full, but the mood was darker than before. Malik Anderson entered with quiet composure, his steps deliberate, his face unreadable. Every eye turned to him not just with curiosity, but with the unsettled recognition that he had become something larger than any of them could control. Gregory Milton sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, his expression strained. He had aged years in just a few days, the stress carving deeper lines into his face. "Mr. Anderson," he began, his voice carrying both frustration and fatigue. "The board is at its breaking point. We cannot operate under constant attack in the press. Investors are demanding stability. Crew unions are threatening strikes if these suspensions hold. Something has to give." Malik took his seat, folding his hands calmly on the polished table. "What has to give is your illusion that this can be contained. This is not about one flight. It is about the air people breathe when they walk into your gates. Right now, that air is poisoned, and unless you purge it, the entire structure will collapse." A murmur rippled through the room. One executive, a middle-aged man with a clipped accent, leaned forward. "But, Mr. Anderson, you escalated this. You turned an incident into a spectacle. Couldn't this have been handled quietly?" With internal discipline, Malik's eyes locked onto him. "Quiet handling is how injustice survives. Silence is a disguise, and I refuse to wear it." Eleanor Brooks, seated further down, finally spoke. Her tone was tired but resolute. "He's right. I've seen too many cases swept under rugs. If we don't act openly now, we'll never recover." Milton's fist hit the table softly, not in anger but in helplessness. "Then what do you want from us, Anderson? Do you want public firings? Do you want to dictate who leads my airline?" Malik shook his head slowly. "I don't want your chair. I want your culture to stop choosing humiliation over humanity. I want policies that make passengers feel safe, not watched. And I want to ensure that no worker, like Jason Cole, has to fear losing his livelihood for telling the truth." Jason, seated quietly at the back, shifted uncomfortably as every head turned toward him. His face flushed, but Malik's steady presence seemed to anchor him. Milton leaned back, his voice bitter. "You speak as though you alone can save us." "No." Malik answered softly. "I speak as someone who refused to let you bury this. The saving is up to all of you." The words cut deep. The executives looked down at their notes, suddenly less certain of their objections. Malik could feel the weight of their shame, though many still resisted. Brian Miller's lawyer cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "My client insists this has gone too far. Mr. Miller is prepared to file a wrongful suspension lawsuit against both the airline and Mr. Anderson personally. He will claim damages for reputational harm." Brian himself sat stiffly beside the lawyer, his eyes burning with resentment. Malik regarded him coolly. "You can file all the lawsuits you want, but you cannot erase your own words. They're recorded. Every passenger in that boarding area heard them. Every executive here has heard them. You suspended yourself with your choices." Linda Hayes's lawyer jumped in, her tone sharp. "And my client, 20 years of service reduced to a smear campaign. She insists her actions were misinterpreted." Malik turned toward Linda, his voice quieter, almost gentle. "Misinterpretation is when words stumble. This was not a stumble. This was a pattern. You chose who deserved warmth and who did not. You made humanity conditional. That is not misinterpretation. That is bias." Linda's lips tightened, but she had no response. The storm rattled the windows again, as if punctuating the gravity of his words. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice firm. "We cannot deny what we've heard. But the reforms Mr. Anderson demands require courage, and I don't know if this board has it." Her honesty hung in the air like a challenge. Malik studied the faces around him, some pale, some defiant, some clearly ashamed. He could almost hear the weight of decades of silence pressing down on them. Then Jason spoke. His voice shook at first, but each word gained strength. "I was scared too. But when I saw how Mr. Anderson was treated, I couldn't keep quiet. If I had, I would have been part of it, and I don't want to be part of that anymore." The room stilled. Jason's courage, raw and unpolished, pierced deeper than Malik's carefully measured words. For a moment, Malik felt a flicker of pride for the young man. This was the spark he had hoped to ignite. Milton sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "If we agree to these reforms, what guarantee do we have that this ends here, that you won't continue dismantling us piece by piece?" Malik's voice softened, but its edge remained. "The guarantee is this: if you change, I will stand beside you, not against you. I will ensure the public sees the effort, not just the failure. But if you resist, if you hide behind lawyers and excuses, then yes, I will dismantle every lie until nothing is left." The room exhaled as if releasing a collective breath. Finally, Milton looked at Eleanor, then at the board, then back at Malik. His voice was reluctant, but it carried the weight of surrender. "We'll proceed with the reforms." The decision was not unanimous, but it was enough. Malik felt the tide shift. As the meeting ended, Eleanor caught Malik's arm. "You've forced us into a corner, but maybe that's what we needed." Malik gave her a small nod. "Corners show us who we really are." Jason followed Malik into the hallway, his steps quick. "You did it," he whispered. Malik shook his head. "No, Jason, we did. You spoke when you didn't have to. That matters more than you know." They walked toward the exit together, the echoes of the storm still rolling above. For Malik, the breaking point had come not just for the airline, but for the culture it represented. He knew the fight wasn't over, but today, A crack had opened wide enough for the light to break through. In the days that followed, the world seemed to orbit around Flight 742. News anchors debated Malik Anderson's actions with fiery passion. Morning shows replayed his speech about dignity and accountability. Social media flooded with hashtags, difficult passenger, justice in the sky, Anderson effect. But with visibility came resistance. Some praised Malik as a beacon of change, while others accused him of exploiting his power. Pilots' unions worried the suspension set a dangerous precedent. Passenger advocacy groups, however, rallied behind him, citing their own experiences of being treated as less than by airlines. Through it all, Malik remained steady. He granted few interviews, choosing instead to let his actions speak. His days were filled with meetings with regulators, with advocacy organizations, with the airline's reluctant executives. Each conversation revealed just how deep the culture of silence ran. On the third day, Malik walked into a packed town hall arranged by the airline. Hundreds of employees filled the room: pilots, attendants, gate agents, mechanics. Their faces carried a mix of anger, hope, and exhaustion. Eleanor Brooks stood at the podium, trying to maintain order, but all eyes shifted when Malik stepped forward. He didn't speak immediately. He let the murmur die down, the weight of anticipation settle. Then, in a calm voice that carried across the hall, he said, "I know many of you are afraid of change, afraid of losing jobs, afraid of being judged for mistakes you didn't make. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to show you that silence costs more than truth." The room shifted. Some crossed their arms defensively. Others leaned in. Malik's gaze swept the crowd. On Flight 742, I pretended to be what you call a difficult passenger. I did it because I needed to see with my own eyes what others had whispered for years. What I experienced was not new. Many of you know this. Some of you have seen it. Some of you have done it. And too often, you stayed silent. That silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. And it's the choice we must stop making. A young woman near the back raised her hand hesitantly. So what happens to us? The crew that didn't do anything wrong, are we all guilty? Malik shook his head. No, but you are all responsible. Responsibility doesn't mean punishment. It means the opportunity to do better. And that's what this is, an opportunity. The murmur rose again, softer this time. Some employees exchanged uneasy glances. Others whispered to each other. For the first time, Malik saw cracks in the wall of resistance. Jason Cole stood near the front, his uniform slightly wrinkled, but his posture straighter than before. When Malik gestured for him to speak, Jason hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'm not here as a hero," Jason began, his voice trembling slightly. "I was scared. I still am. But when I saw how Mr. Anderson was treated, I couldn't stay quiet. I thought, if I don't do something, then I'm part of it too, and I don't want to live like that." Silence fell heavy. Jason's words cut through the air with more force than any speech Malik could have written. The crowd shifted again, not with applause, but with reflection. Eleanor took back the podium. "The reforms Mr. Anderson demanded will begin immediately. There will be independent audits. There will be transparent complaint channels. There will be training that confronts, not avoids, our culture." Groans rippled through some parts of the room. A pilot in the front row stood, "And if we refuse?" If we say this is too much, Malik's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. Then your refusal will speak louder than my evidence ever could, and the world will see where you stand." The pilot sat down. After the meeting, Malik walked slowly through the terminal. The storm had passed, but the air outside was still damp, the ground slick with rain. He thought of his father's words again, about walking taller even when cut down to size. He wondered what Charles Anderson would think, now seeing his son not just resist humiliation, but reshape an entire industry's reckoning. That evening, Malik returned to his hotel, drained. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to sit without agenda, staring at the city lights across the Thames. His phone buzzed with messages again, praise, criticism, invitations to speak at conferences. He ignored most of them, but one caught his eye. It was from a woman named Deborah Ellis, a teacher from Atlanta. The message was simple. "My students watched your press conference." One of them said, "If he can speak up, maybe I can too. Thank you." Malik set the phone down, his chest tightening. That, more than headlines or reforms, was why he carried this burden. To remind people they weren't as powerless as the world tried to make them feel. Later that night, Jason knocked on his door again. His face was pale, his voice unsteady. "Mr. Anderson, Malik. They're saying some of the suspended crew are planning to sue me personally for defamation, for betrayal." Malik gestured for him to sit. "Jason, listen to me. They want to scare you back into silence. Don't let them. You told the truth, and truth is your shield." Jason's eyes brimmed with tears. "But I don't have your power. I don't have protection." Malik placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You have something stronger. You have courage. And if you fall, I'll make sure you don't fall alone." Jason nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. Malik felt the old ache in his chest again, the memory of being young, unprotected, voiceless. But this time, he could offer what he had never been given, the assurance that someone powerful stood behind him. The next morning, Malik appeared on a major news program. The anchor, sharp-eyed and relentless, asked the question that had been circulating all week. "Mr. Anderson, some say you used your influence unfairly, that you entrapped these employees, that you've turned a personal grievance into a crusade. How do you respond?" Malik leaned forward slightly, his voice calm. "I didn't entrap anyone. I didn't ask them to doubt my ticket, to dismiss my voice, to deny me what others received without question. They chose that. What I did was refuse to bury their choices in silence. If that looks like a crusade, then perhaps it is. But it's not for me. It's for everyone who doesn't have my platform, my power. It's for the grandmother humiliated at the gate, the student questioned for no reason, the worker who lost a job for speaking up. If being difficult means refusing to stay silent, then I will wear that label proudly." The interview went viral within hours. Hashtags multiplied. Support grew louder, though so did resistance. But Malik didn't waver. He knew that tides never turned without waves crashing first. That evening, he stood by the river again, the cool air wrapping around him. He thought of his mother, Elaine, who had endured her own quiet humiliations with grace. He thought of Jason, carrying fear and courage in equal measure. He thought of all the voices that had joined his since Flight 742. The tide was turning, slowly, painfully, but undeniably, and Malik knew once a tide turned, there was no forcing it back. By the following week, the airline could no longer pretend the storm would blow over. Passenger boycotts gained momentum. Advocacy groups staged demonstrations outside airports, and regulators issued public statements pressing for accountability. Television networks replayed every clip of Malik Anderson, his calm words at the press conference, his firm answers in interviews, his sharp confrontation with lawyers in the boardroom, but, behind the scenes, pressure was building. Gregory Milton called an emergency late-night meeting at headquarters. Malik was invited, though he suspected the word invited was only a courtesy. He arrived to find the boardroom dimly lit, papers scattered, and faces taut with exhaustion. Eleanor Brooks sat near the center, her expression neutral, but her eyes flickering with the weariness of someone who had been fighting battles on multiple fronts. Milton wasted no time. "Mr. Anderson," he began, his voice clipped. "We cannot sustain this any longer. Lawsuits are piling up. The union is threatening to walk. Our reputation is hanging by a thread." Malik took his seat slowly, unhurried despite the urgency in the air. "Your reputation is not hanging by a thread. It was already frayed long before me. I'm just the one who refused to hide the tear." One of the board members, a silver-haired man with a sharp tone, leaned forward. "You forced us into a corner. Do you realize that you staged yourself as a victim to make a point, and now our entire airline suffers?" Malik's gaze was steady. "I didn't stage myself. I gave you a mirror. Don't be angry with me for showing you your reflection." The man flushed, but said nothing more. Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice measured. "There is no way forward without reform. We all know it. The question is whether we're willing to commit fully or keep bleeding until there's nothing left to save." Milton's face tightened. He turned to Malik. "What exactly do you want from us?" In concrete terms, Malik folded his hands, his tone deliberate. "First, a permanent independent oversight board that reviews all complaints of discrimination or abuse completely separate from your chain of command. Second, transparent reporting of every incident, made public quarterly. Third, protections for whistleblowers like Jason Cole, who should never fear retaliation for honesty. And fourth, training that doesn't just check boxes but rewrites how you see the people in front of you, not passengers, not profit centers, but human beings." The room went still. Some executives shifted uneasily. Others scribbled notes. Milton looked as though the words themselves weighed on him. "Do you understand what you're asking? This isn't just reform. It's a revolution." Malik's eyes didn't waver. "Then it's overdue." At that moment, Brian Miller's lawyer spoke sharply. "My client will never accept being sacrificed for this so-called revolution. He's prepared to fight in court. He claims you deliberately antagonized him, Mr. Anderson, and you'll have to answer for that." Malik turned his gaze on Brian himself. "Antagonize Brian? All I did was stand in line with the ticket I had paid for. All I did was ask for what was promised. If that was enough to make you unravel, the problem is not me. The problem is that you never believed someone like me belonged in that seat." Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Linda Hayes's lawyer tried to intervene, but Malik raised a hand. "I don't want your excuses. I don't want apologies wrapped in self-defense. What I want is truth, and the truth is that you treated me differently because of who I am. That truth is now public, and no lawsuit, no smear, no denial will erase it." The silence afterward was heavy. Eleanor leaned forward. breaking it. We can keep circling this forever, or we can accept what's in front of us. Change is no longer optional. Milton looked around the room, searching for support, but found little. Even the executives who had resisted most strongly were now quiet, their energy drained by the relentless pressure of public opinion and Malik's unshakable calm. Finally, he slumped back in his chair. Very well. We'll move forward with the reforms. Malik gave a small nod. Then begin with accountability. Announce the suspensions will hold and that independent reviews are underway. Make it clear this isn't a witch hunt, but a reckoning, and make it public. The meeting adjourned after midnight. Malik walked out into the rain, the cold drops soaking through his coat. Jason was waiting outside, his face pale but resolute. "They're saying my name on the news now," Jason said quietly. "Some people call me brave, others call me a traitor." Malik placed a hand on his shoulder. "Courage always looks like betrayal to those who prefer silence. Don't let them define you." Jason's voice cracked. "But what if I lose everything?" "Then you'll find something better," Malik replied softly. "Because you'll have kept your soul intact, and that is worth more than any paycheck." Jason nodded slowly, his eyes wet. Malik felt the boy's struggle in his own chest. He remembered what it was like to be young, to fear the weight of speaking up. He vowed silently that Jason would not carry it alone. The next day, the airline held a press conference. Cameras flashed. Microphones jutted forward. Gregory Milton stood at the podium, his words carefully measured. "We recognize the seriousness of recent events, effective immediately. We are implementing independent oversight, whistleblower protections, and mandatory cultural training across our operations. We will no longer allow silence to shield misconduct. We will change." The announcement rippled through the industry like a shockwave. Some praised it as historic, others dismissed it as damage control, but Malik knew it was a beginning. Afterward, he lingered in the hallway, away from the cameras. Eleanor approached him quietly. "You realize you've changed everything, don't you?" Malik shook his head. "I didn't change everything. I just refused to let it stay the same." She gave him a long look. "Either way, the tide is moving, and none of us can turn it back." That night, Malik returned to his hotel, weary but restless. He stood by the window, watching the city glow in the rain. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a young man he didn't know. It read, "I was denied boarding last year because they said I didn't look like I belonged in first class. I didn't fight back then. Watching you fight made me realize I should have. Thank you for giving me courage." Malik closed his eyes, the ache in his chest both heavy and healing. He whispered into the quiet room, "That's why." For the first time since stepping onto Flight 742, he felt something like hope. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. The week after, the reforms were announced. Malik Anderson found himself walking through the terminal of the very airport where the ordeal had begun. Travelers bustled around him, rolling suitcases, juggling coffee cups, rushing to catch flights. For the first time in days, Malik wasn't here to fight or to confront. He was simply observing. The terminal felt different, not transformed overnight. No revolution happens that fast, but lighter somehow. Employees greeted passengers with more deliberate warmth. The announcements over the intercom carried less indifference. Even the security staff moved with a subtle shift in posture, as though aware that unseen eyes were watching not only their efficiency, but their humanity. Jason Cole walked beside Malik, no longer the nervous attendant hiding in corners. His uniform was freshly pressed, his shoulders straighter, his eyes clearer. "It feels strange," he admitted, "like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see if this sticks." Malik nodded. Change always begins with hesitation. What matters is whether you breathe through it or retreat. Jason glanced at him, his expression a mixture of respect and uncertainty. "Do you really think it will last?" Malik's gaze lingered on a young family moving through security. A toddler clutched his mother's hand while the father carefully folded a stroller. A guard bent down to help rather than bark orders. Malik felt the image settle in his chest. "It will last, if people like you make it last. My fight lit the spark, but yours will keep the fire." As they walked further, a small group of passengers recognized Malik. A woman in her 50s stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Anderson, I just wanted to thank you. Last year, they questioned my son at this gate, treated him like a criminal because of his skin. He was 16. We complained, but no one listened. Watching you stand up, it felt like someone finally heard us." Malik placed a hand gently over hers. "I didn't do it alone. Your story is part of why this matters. Don't stop telling it." The woman smiled through her tears and stepped back, her gratitude radiating through the crowd. Jason looked at Malik, almost in awe. "They see you as a symbol now." Malik shook his head softly. "Symbols don't change the world. People do. Don't forget that." Later that afternoon, Malik attended one final board session, this time in a smaller, more subdued conference room. Gregory Milton sat at the head, his tone far less combative than before. The storm that had once charged the air between them seemed to have dissipated. "We've begun implementing the oversight board," Milton said, his voice careful. "The whistleblower protections will be announced next week. There's resistance, of course, but—" He paused, almost reluctantly. "It's moving forward." Eleanor Brooks leaned in, her voice carrying quiet strength. "It's more than I thought we'd manage in such a short time, and it's only the beginning." Malik looked around the room, sensing the shift. Some executives still carried resentment in their eyes, but the fire of open defiance was gone. What remained was resignation, perhaps even the first seeds of acceptance. "I don't need gratitude," Malik said evenly. "What I need is follow-through. Words on paper mean nothing without action in the gate lines, in the cabins, in the way you look at every passenger. If you want redemption, you'll find it there." Milton exhaled slowly, as though surrendering something heavy. "You've changed us, Anderson, whether we like it or not." Malik gave a faint nod. That was the point. After the meeting, Eleanor walked with him down the quiet corridor. "You know, you could walk away now," she said. "You've done more than anyone thought possible." Malik's voice was soft. "I can't walk away. Not yet. The fight doesn't end with policies. It ends when a passenger doesn't have to wonder if their dignity will be stripped at the gate. Until then, I keep going." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Your father would be proud." Malik's chest tightened. The memory of Charles Anderson rising once again, his steady voice, his quiet resilience, his reminder to walk taller even when the world tried to cut him down. Malik allowed himself a rare smile. "I hope so." That evening, Malik returned to his hotel, intending to rest. But when he entered the lobby, he was surprised to find a group of employees waiting. Gate agents, attendants, even janitors. They stood together, holding a simple sign handwritten on poster board. "Thank you for making us better." Jason stood among them, his eyes shining. "We wanted you to know, not everyone hates the changes. Some of us needed them more than we realized." For a moment, Malik couldn't speak. He felt the weight of days, of years, of unspoken battles pressing against his chest. Then he nodded, his voice quiet but certain. Then this fight was worth it. The employees applauded softly, not the thunder of a staged event, but the genuine gratitude of people who felt seen. Malik carried that sound with him long after he returned to his room. The next morning, as his car pulled away from the airport, Malik glanced back one last time. The glass windows gleamed in the sunlight, streaked still with the memory of rain. He thought of Rachel Turner, the check-in agent who had dismissed him. He thought of Brian Miller and Linda Hayes, now under review. He thought of Jason, who had found his voice, and Eleanor, who had chosen courage. Most of all, he thought of the passengers, the grandmother, the teenager, the countless faces who had been silenced before. This was for them. His phone buzzed with another message. It was from Elaine Anderson, his mother. Just 5 words, "Proud of you, always." Malik closed his eyes, the ache in his chest finally easing. He whispered softly, as though his father could still hear, "We're walking taller now, Dad." The road ahead was uncertain, but Malik knew one truth. The reckoning of Flight 742 had become more than his fight. It was a promise that dignity was not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be honored. And as long as he breathed, he would make sure the world remembered it. The story of Malik Anderson is not just about an airline or a single flight. It's about the choices we all face when confronted with injustice. Many of us know what it feels like to be dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel small. Sometimes, the temptation is to stay silent, to avoid conflict, to let it pass. But silence often comes at a cost, the quiet erosion of our dignity, the normalization of wrongs that should never be accepted. Malik's story reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is as simple as refusing to move from your rightful seat, as steady as speaking truth in the face of disbelief. It shows that power used with calm, empathy, and determination can turn humiliation into transformation. For older audiences especially, this story carries a familiar echo, the struggles of past decades, the hard-fought battles for respect and equality, the reminder that progress comes only when someone decides to say, "Enough." Malik's actions remind us all that standing for dignity, our own and others, is not a radical act, but a human responsibility. And it is never too late to choose courage over silence. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like this matter because they remind us of the strength we all carry within and the change we can create together. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life and keeps these conversations alive. Together, we can make sure that voices of dignity and justice are never silenced.